Going beyond the headlines. Asking the questions you want answered. Exploring government policies and how they impact you. We are delving deeper.
Good evening and welcome to Delving Deeper. I am Ria Rupchan sitting in for Ayana Carter. Joining us this evening, Minister of Energy and Energy Industries and Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister, the Honourable Stuart Young. Good evening, Minister Young, and welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much. Good evening. It's great to be here.
Now, let's start the discussion with your recent meeting with U.S. officials, which happened just about last weekend ago. So what can you tell us or what can you share with us that came out of those meetings and discussions?
Well, what I can tell you all is that if you look over time, all of the meetings are very, very strategic. So last weekend, it was the Honorable Prime Minister, myself in Washington, D.C., for very strategic interactions with the right people in the U.S. government and sending the right messages, having the right discussions. This didn't start last weekend. This is something that we have been doing for a while now. In fact, last year, during the course of last year, I made approximately, I think, 6 or 8 trips to Washington, D.C., very, very quietly, and to engage with the right persons, both in the U.S. government, in the U.S. Congress, the U.S. Senate, both myself and the Prime Minister. We had meetings with the U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris, and others in the administration, at the ministry, for me, at the State Department, at the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Energy, and other ministries. And what people in Trinidad and Tobago need to know, whilst we're not trumpeting about these meetings, you begin to see the results come out for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So my message on that is, unfortunately, I can't get into details as to what these discussions are about, but they're all very, very strategic conversations and interventions.
Can I then ask, because as you mentioned, you've been on so many of these trips abroad since assuming office, can you tell us anything at all with respect to the energy sector, if we as Trinidad and Tobago are seeing the benefits from any of those discussions?
Absolutely. I mean, the discussions we have with the various governments abroad, the various multinational oil and gas companies, all of them have been bearing fruit, despite what people may be hearing. So what you would see with the multinationals, so you see us engaging with the head executives of the BPs, the Shells, the EOGs, Woodside, formerly BHP, a lot of these multinational oil and gas companies, and they continue to invest in Trinidad and Tobago. Again, these are very strategic conversations and interventions, because you have to understand, in the global energy sector, a lot of multinationals are taking decisions to no longer invest in certain jurisdictions. Whereas we are seeing here in Trinidad and Tobago, all of these companies continuing to invest and invest heavily, hundreds of millions of US dollars in Trinidad and Tobago. So those are the immediate benefits of these conversations or interventions with foreign governments, is just to make sure that we continue to sit at the table of decision makers in the global energy sector. Because unlike a lot of other areas, energy, oil, gas, hydrocarbons, even the renewable side, are all very global conversations. So all of these trips, and we do decline a lot of them, but all of these trips are always to make sure that Trinidad and Tobago is kept at the forefront. And I can say without any fear of contradiction that we are seeing the tangible benefits of all of these various meetings, conversations, trips abroad, etc., including revenue in the hundreds of millions of dollars.
And of course, once it's available, you'll be able to give us more details on that.
Absolutely, yes. Absolutely. And let me correct myself. It's actually billions of dollars that we've seen the direct benefit of these trips, these negotiations, these discussions.
Well, Minister Young, can you actually give us just a few examples maybe of some of those benefits? Because people will want to know and they're curious to know, how exactly is this helping Trinidad and Tobago?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things we've been able to benefit from is the renegotiation, for example, of our price of gas. So whereas previously for decades it was on one fixed price, for example, a Henry Hub price, which today is $2, it could go up and down. we have managed to negotiate a basket price for our gas in Trinidad and Tobago. A basket price taking 1/3 in the Asian market, something called JKM, Japanese Korean marker, another third from the European market, either NBP or TTF, and then another third based on oil prices. So just by using that basket price for our gas, we get much higher prices for our gas than we traditionally did. And we calculated it the other day, just as a direct result of our negotiations with only 2 of the large companies in Trinidad and Tobago. Since 2019 or 2018 to the end of March of this year, we have gotten over $15.7 billion that we would not have gotten if we did not have that negotiation. So that's a direct tangible. Also, as a result of the discussions that we're having, we have people producing gas fields that they may not have produced before. So you have Shell doing things like Colibri, Barracuda. Just last week, I had a meeting with EOG, and EOG were thanking us for some of the decisions we took to work with them and to change the terms of some of their licenses to allow them to drill some wells that they would not have drilled that are producing better. With BP, they're doing Cassia Sea compression. You had all sorts of other fields that they're working on. Their infill drilling program is doing well. So these are some of the tangible results. Then on the geopolitical side, us standing at the table when you had a huge global push saying you need to move away from hydrocarbons and come off of oil and gas. The Prime Minister and myself in Doha, Qatar, last year, February, started a global conversation saying that gas is the clean energy source going forward. And it's amazing, just last week when we were in Washington, D.C., both of us were looking at an ad on Prime Time, one of the biggest American news networks, and they were now pushing the same conversation. Gas and renewables is the way forward. So these are some of the tangible things, and we are part of the decision-making process. Then also on the geopolitics, the world would have seen that Trinidad and Tobago, as a result of the discussions we had with the United States government, got an OFAC license, a waiver, to pursue gas production, the gas production of a Venezuelan field called Dragon. I've made many trips to Venezuela as well, negotiating with the Venezuelan government, meeting with President Maduro, Vice President Delcy Rodriguez, their ministers of energy, and these types of things. So we are working very hard, all for the benefit of the people of Trinidad and Tobago.
Now, you did mention the Dragon gas deal. That was actually going to be my next question. If you could kind of give us an update on what's happening between Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela. What's going on with that?
We continue to be in discussions. We have made very good progress. As the world knows, we had negotiated a commercial term sheet back in 2018, which means we had agreed certain things. We've begun the negotiations, the discussions again. I'm heading over to Venezuela in the not too distant future to continue those discussions. Our technical people are having meetings. So I always smile and laugh internally at the naysayers who say nothing is going on. That is furthest thing from the truth. So our technical teams are discussing the way that this gas production can take place, where new wells will have to be drilled, where the pipelines should be run, etc. Those conversations are taking place. We're also having conversations on the commercial side, and then there are also the political conversations and discussions taking place. At the right time, we will be able to announce a successful conclusion, I hope, of these Dragon negotiations and conversations. But the point is, they are taking place as these things do. They don't happen overnight. We have made good progress. There are areas we're working on, and at the appropriate time, we'll say more.
Minister, when last you were here, all eyes were on the war in Ukraine. Can you tell us what effect at all it has had on the Trinidad and Tobago economy?
Absolutely. Well, that Russia-Ukraine conflict and war had an impact on the global economy. And of course, at a time when the world was still in a pandemic, the COVID pandemic, and now starting to come out of it, what it did is it drove commodity prices very high. So you had gas prices go high, you had oil prices go high. These things in turn drive inflation rates, and there's global inflation rates going upwards because, of course, cost of shipping goes upwards, cost of manufacturing goods, and we are a nation that imports a lot of what we use. Where it was good for us is on our revenue side. So when you had higher gas prices, you had highest ammonia prices we've seen in decades, high methanol prices, which are some of the commodities we make, high fertilizer prices. So we had a bumper year of revenue. That is how it benefited us on the revenue side. Now, as Europe has gone out of winter, you see gas prices coming back down. You see ammonia prices, methanol prices stabilizing, still higher than a few years ago. But you see those things, and that is a volatility of a hydrocarbon-based economy. And that's what we're dealing with. But we had multiple benefits, but at the same time, we as the people felt the global effect of that Russia-Ukraine war with the rise in prices and a cost of living and these types of things. And it is something we're very, very aware of as a government. And we're always looking, how do we maximize our revenue? And that's what I've spent, I would say, the greater part of the last 6 years of my life, even before being the substantive Minister of Energy, in negotiating better prices for our gas products for Trinidad and Tobago.
And you mentioned gas products, and it's usually people, when think about gas, they think about fuel at the pump. How would you address the statement when people say, oh, you should lower the cost of gas at the pump? How would you answer that question when people say that?
Absolutely. Let me first of all correct that perception. When I'm talking about gas, I'm talking about natural gas. And excuse me, our natural gas is used in the production of LNG, which is liquefied natural gas, which is used all over the world, or in petchems, petroleum chemical products like ammonia, methanol, urea, UAN in Trinidad, and also a significant amount is used in our electricity production. Now, when I say gas and we think about fuel at the pumps, it's a completely different story. So last year, what you saw is the price of oil rise to above $100 a barrel, some very high prices. Right now, it's come back down, it's hovering below $80 a barrel. What the government had promised is we will continue to monitor it, we will look at it, and when it is necessary to make adjustments at the pump, we will do so. The Minister of Finance and myself are in constant conversation, dialogue, and looking at that. You can't just change the fuel at the pump price overnight, because if we do so, and next thing there's a spike in the cost of fuels, the cost of diesel and gasoline, super unleaded as we know it, etc., then there's another readjustment. But it is something that the government is continuing to look at. And what I can tell people, as I said in Parliament about 3 weeks ago or 2 weeks ago, we are still subsidizing heavily. So we still spent about $1.6 billion in our last fiscal term subsidizing both LPG as well as fuel at the pumps. This year, in the mid-year review, Ministry of Energy had to get $600 million additional dollars solely for the payment of fuel subsidies. So it is not to say that the government is making any money whatsoever. In fact, what we have to do is continue a heavy subsidizing program, and it is something we're monitoring. I can assure the population of that. And as soon as the Minister of Finance thinks it's the right time, he will come to Cabinet and we will take a decision as to what to do at the pump.
Some people also say the system that the U.S. has, because you've been there, so, and I'm sure that you understand how it works with their prices go up and down. Have you ever thought about maybe adopting a similar type system in Trinidad and Tobago? You
all may recall last year we actually passed the legislation. That's called fuel liberalization. Yeah. So whatever the market price is, we pay it at the pump. I want to remind people, one of the big conversations in the United States and Europe last year when prices went up, and it was amazing because it was affecting the US midterm elections, and President Biden and his advisors were looking at it. How do we bring down the cost of gas at the pumps? It was a massive conversation. At the time, I was making numerous trips to the United States, and we were remarking, you'd see fuel prices over $5 US a gallon, whereas in Trinidad, it was still being heavily subsidized and stable. So we need to understand that when the prices go up, that's not at a time that you want to be able to, as a consumer, be paying at the pump for those price rises. But it is something we've looked at. The legislation has been passed, and at the right time we'll proclaim it to allow a full fuel liberalization. And I hope we're ready for it, because it means if prices go up, you have to suck salt, as they say, and we pay the high prices at the pump. If the prices go down, well, hey, great benefit to us. But right now, as I say, even with prices taking a slight dip downwards, there still is a lot of subsidization taking place.
Now, Trinidad and Tobago is often described as a mature province. What does this mean for production numbers, basically, even in an environment with inflated prices?
Excellent question. A mature province means we have been exploiting oil and gas in Trinidad and Tobago, oil for over 100 years. Gas, we've been utilizing it and monetizing it for at least the last 4, almost 5 decades. What it means is when you have a limited amount of acreage, as we call it, so a limited land space and land in this case, also includes offshore. Once you're pulling that oil and gas out of the ground, it is not being replaced. So if today I have 100 and I use 50, it means I have 50 left. So when you work out for 100 years you've been utilizing oil, it is going to decline. Another part of the conversation we need to understand is with all of these wells, you have a natural decline of about 15 to 20%. So even when you're bringing on additional and new production, unless you cross that 15 to 20% decline, so in other words, you have 100, every year it is declining by 20 naturally, in addition to what you're pulling out. So you have to increase your production well over that to increase it. So those are the difficulties we're facing. We've been exploiting these resources for very, very long periods of time. The areas where there still seems to be hydrocarbon resources, in our case gas in particular, are now the deep water areas. We've managed to negotiate with Shell. They're going to produce one of the biggest fields, Manatee, which is across border with Venezuela. We have about 2.7 TCF. Venezuela has about 7 TCF on their side. Shell has agreed and we managed to negotiate with Venezuela. We can pursue our 2.7 TCF. Right now we're in the middle of negotiations with Woodside for deep water. Deep water means it's about 236, if I remember correctly, miles away from land. So they have to run the pipelines, 236 miles of pipeline in very deep water. So to make those things commercial, we have to think outside of the box, we have to be innovative. So when I talk about us being a mature province, unfortunately, you're coming to that stage where your resources have declined. The question becomes, where did you find more? And what I want to tell the people of Trinidad and Tobago is that is where your government again has been working very, very hard and over time for you, that we're not only looking at the resources in Trinidad and Tobago's waters. We have negotiated commercial term sheet with Grenada. If they find gas, as they may in their province, we'll bring it to Trinidad. We're having similar conversations with Barbados. That is exactly what we're doing with Dragon, with Venezuela, and there's a lot more potential in Venezuela. The day the first molecule comes from Venezuela, it is going to put Trinidad and Tobago right back there in terms of future for decades and decades. So that is what we're working on. So when I hear the naysayers and unfortunately the opposition attacking these initiatives, I think, don't you care about Trinidad and Tobago? Because you're not doing it for Stuart Young, you're not doing it for Keith Rowley, you're not doing it for the PNM. It's for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. We're also looking towards other areas in the Caribbean, having discussions with provinces like Guyana, Suriname, etc., because we can provide energy security not only for the region but for the globe. We have plants at Point Lisas and with our LNG in Point Fortin that have immediate capacity. Once we get the additional gas, we make the product, we sell the product, and whoever's gas it is gets the money for it. So it is a win-win-win-win-win, and that's what we're working on.
Which brings me to a question that leads right into that, Minister Young. Are you able to basically let us know or tell us what steps the government is taking to diversify the economy?
Absolutely. I mean, again, diversification is one of the areas we've looked at. Very often, diversification comes across as some sort of cliche, you wave a magic wand, and it will happen overnight. It just doesn't work that way. Especially when you look around where we are. You look at all our Caribbean and our CARICOM neighbors. What are their economies based on? Most of it is tourism. And you see the struggles, you hit a period of COVID, what that does. Some of the areas we are looking at for immediate diversification, one of the main areas is the maritime area. Because we see where we're placed, we see geographically, the Gulf of Paria is a safe haven, is almost as a harbor. We also have the opportunity to be able to provide bunkering fuels. We're looking at the future of fueling of ships, and methanol is there. Hey, we're a producer of methanol. So we're looking at the maritime industry, which is why we acquired the Caridoc facility to do floating dry docks there, to repair and to service smaller vessels. We're looking to build a huge Panamax facility for the Panamax vessels in La Brea, and that will make Trinidad and Tobago in this region the leader in maritime. So that is one of the areas that we're pursuing. We're still going to focus on our hydrocarbons. We're looking at other areas that we can. So for example, we're about to finish the Phoenix Park, industrial park down in the Point Lisas area, and that is aimed for persons who want to come and manufacture and then use Trinidad and its port facilities for export. So these are some of the areas we're looking at, but I think the one that we can get there the quickest on is on the maritime side.
Now, Minister, I'm sure that you would have read articles and heard talk around about the collapse of the energy sector
Yes.
since your tenure as Minister of Energy. How would you respond to that?
You know, the old people have a saying, and they keep reminding me of it, and people who are monitoring, especially those in the energy industry, because it's not for me to say whether I've been a success or failure. I don't get involved in that at all. But those who are in the energy sector, have the conversations with them. And they keep saying, Stuart, they don't throw stones at a tree that's not bearing fruit. I will leave this job at some stage, and I will be able to move on to whatever's the next chapter of my life, knowing that during my tenure, Trinidad and Tobago's energy sector was carried successfully through the transition. Some of the things we have negotiated decades ago, they could have been done, but no one did it. We managed to settle over $9 billion in claims left by some of those same people who are claiming my tenure was a failure, right? During the 2010 to 2015 period, they racked up $9 billion in claims against NGC. Without trumpeting our horn, we went in, we negotiated the settlement of those things. I've told you some of the better prices we're getting. We have managed to increase production in certain areas. It may not be an overall increase, but just by the bringing on of new fields, new wells, new initiatives. And I think if you speak to people in the energy industry, the experts who are living, breathing in the industry a lot longer than I am, they will see that during this tenure, I would say from 2015 to now, they have seen innovation that they've never seen before. I mean, the Ministry of Energy technocrats will tell you the same thing. We have thought outside of the box and these types of things. So I don't play any mind at all. I don't heed what they're saying about me being a success or a failure. That's not for me to judge. Once the people of Trinidad and Tobago are getting better for what are their resources, I rest very easy at night. And I think in time, history will tell what was a good period for Trinidad and Tobago.
And you did mention the National Gas Company. Can you tell us exactly how much TNTech actually owes the NGC, and how does this actually impact the operations at NGC, which are both state agencies, and how are they working on resolving that debt?
TNTech uses the gas that NGC purchases, and that's what we need to understand as citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. The gas doesn't come free. So we actually have to pay for the gas. We've negotiated better prices for some of the gas using electricity production, and that gas has to be paid for. TNTech does not pay NGC the gas. So they've run up a bill now of between $5 to $7 billion in how much they owe to NGC. So of course that affects NGC's books. At the end of the day, the government will work with TNTech and NGC to see how this can be dealt with. We've done it before in our tenure and our term, and we will do it again. But what the people of Trinidad and Tobago, you and me, need to understand is that is being subsidized again. So the price of gas is subsidized, the cost of gas is being subsidized, the cost of electricity is being heavily, heavily subsidized. One of the ways I'm looking to deal with that, because the Ministry of Energy is in charge of power generation for Trinidad and Tobago. The Ministry of Public Utilities is in charge of transmission of the electricity via TNTech. So we are the ones who have to deal with at Energy, deal with the independent power producers. One of the things I'm driving them at right now and waiting for them to come back to me on, there's new technology that can be used that will mean less consumption of gas, but the same production of electricity. So I want us to move to what we call combined cycle generation of electricity. As soon as we do that, we're going to save tremendous amounts of gas that we can then sell for the people of Trinidad and Tobago, get proper revenues for. So those, again, are some of the things that we're running in parallel, many, many tracks at the Ministry of Energy, because we are the ones in charge of that.
Of course. Now, would you say then, is it fair to say that TNTech customers, the citizens, benefit from the existing business deal between TNTech and NGC?
Absolutely. I mean, the price as well that TNTech is paying NGC for gas is a price that is highly subsidized. So even the price that is a contractual price between NGC and TNTech is a subsidized price and nowhere near the cost of what NGC in turn has to pay a BP, a Shell, a EOG, a Woodside, or any of these gas producers for the gas that they're purchasing that's then used to produce electricity.
You've come across, so much criticism, positives and negatives. What would you say is the biggest challenge that you've had as Minister of Energy?
Energy sector during this tenure has been very, very volatile. So you would have seen globally people saying at COP26, we need to move away from the use of hydrocarbons. We now need to not use oil and gas. How do you manage in a global energy sector where that is a huge part of the conversation? You then had the Russia-Ukraine crisis and war taking place. We have to sail through that. You then have a whole set of energy contracts coming to end. You have to negotiate those. So we've had a lot of volatility. What is it that I can say we've done well? We have created a platform of stability. So even when all of that is going on, even when you have people screaming that Point Lisas is going to collapse, that was a time when commodity prices for methanol and ammonia were very low. And there were negotiations with the government and NGC. If we had given in to the low prices they were asking for, last year when prices went up to those record levels, we the people of Trinidad and Tobago would not have benefited. You would notice that during the course of high prices, no one was complaining. They were looking for more gas, right? But of course, when their prices are low, they were screaming at the government and screaming about. So these are the things that we've managed to do. And I think that will certainly go down, I think, as one of the things we've achieved, which is despite all of the noise, despite all of the global volatility in a global energy sector, because none of this is decided prices in Trinidad and Tobago, how much oil is going to be sold at today, how much gas price of Henry Hub, JKM, TTF are going to be today, the price of ammonia. But we have provided stability. We've managed to increase revenues during good times. We're keeping the industry running. Sure, we would love more gas production, but where does it come from? So we don't stay in Trinidad, we go outside, we negotiate with Venezuela. We look elsewhere in the region, where can we get more gas? And these are the things we're doing, very quietly, without a plume, and just getting it done.
I know you mentioned some of your achievements, but I was going to ask you some more of that. And you said without a plume, but I think you should. Tell us what else? I mean, some of your achievements. You just mentioned that in this volatile system that we just had. What else are some of your achievements? Let the people know what Minister Young does.
That is so out of my character.
I know it's probably tooting your horn a little bit, but this is your time.
Whatever I do for Trinidad and Tobago. So I can tell you right now, we're back on the global energy map. So I'm constantly being asked, can you come and speak on what are the initiatives that are taking place in Trinidad and Tobago, in the region, in, for example, hydrogen, green hydrogen. I've spoken at many conferences on that now, and people continue to ask us, can you come and speak about LNG? I think it's good for Trinidad and Tobago to once again be recognized as a leader. I don't seek any of these things. I mean, I remember last year when we had an interview with Richard Quest on CNN, people were saying, but now they would understand the messaging that I gave in that interview was for an international audience that then led to an OFAC license and waiver in January of the following year, where no one else apart from Chevron got such an OFAC license and a waiver. And people need to understand, as I said at the start of this interview, everything I say, everything I do is very, very strategic with one goal in mind. How do we make it better for Trinidad and Tobago? So we're leading in renewables. We negotiated, and it was a difficult negotiation, got it done. The largest solar project in the whole English-speaking CARICOM. That's about to start construction. We finally got that across the line, 112.2 megawatts. I've gotten Cabinet to agree we can build the first green hydrogen plant and what we call the value chain in Trinidad and Tobago. We're looking to use wind. We're looking to use more solar. So we're also doing the renewable side. We are concerned about global climate change. When we signed on to the methane reduction pledge with the United States and former Secretary of State John Kerry, I was able to report, the Prime Minister was able to look at him and say, hey, we've already begun doing the things that people are promising to do. So once again, I think we've moved our energy sector as being a global leader where people are looking at us and saying, hey, small Trinidad and Tobago is achieving these things and they have the right policies and they're moving through the energy transition.
Now, you mentioned the green energy. Also comes to mind electric vehicles. How is the government moving on that? Can you give us a status on what that looks like?
Absolutely. We were one of the first CARICOM countries to waive all import taxes, whether it's VAT, customs, other import duties on the importation of electric vehicles. Unfortunately, the whole world is demanding electric vehicles. We have not gotten the amount that we would like to get, but it's open. It is bring in your electric vehicles, use them. The technologies improve. You no longer need public chargers all over the place, especially in a small island, twin island state like Trinidad and Tobago, because a normal electric vehicle can go about 230, that's the average, miles on a full charge, and you could charge it at home overnight. 230 miles will take you around the whole island of Trinidad in a day, so you're fine. So we have our policies in place. Right now, the Ministry of Works through PTSC is looking to procure electric buses, which will also go a great way on our public transport in reduction of emissions and the use of electric vehicles. So we're doing our part in that area as well.
I want to ask based on that, and I have a friend actually who has an electric vehicle, and he has tested out across Trinidad and Tobago, and he says it works beautifully. But some people may have concerns about basically the electricity charge on that. How can you address that when people say, but this is going to raise my electricity bill, how am I going to afford it? How can you answer that one?
Well, you use fuel at the pump in your car. I think when you do the comparison, there's a certain time where you're actually saving by the use of electricity, right? And right now, our electricity prices are still very highly subsidized. So I think that's a personal mathematics that somebody needs to work out. Does it make sense for me? Does it not make sense for me? I think eventually it does, but what you're doing is you're cleaning up in the environment.
And that's the important thing.
Correct.
Minister Young, your final thoughts.
Trinidad and Tobago, we will continue to do what needs to be done for Trinidad and Tobago. We are going to continue to be a hydrocarbon-based economy, hopefully for a very, very long time, because there are very few products such as the oil, the gas, the byproducts of gas on global markets that can earn the type of revenue we have become accustomed to, even as we work towards diversification in other areas. Hopefully, at the end of this interview, you all have gotten a good update and you understand that we continue to work very, very hard, 24/7. In fact, sometimes it feels like 25/8 on behalf of the people of Trinidad and Tobago to bring better revenue, better technology, better products to Trinidad and Tobago. Without fear or favor, malice or ill will, I will continue to do so.
Thank you so much, Minister Young.
Right.
And that's our show. I want to thank Minister Young for being our guest on Delving Deeper this evening. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It was wonderful to be here again.
Join us at the same time next week for another episode of Delving Deeper. I am Ria Rupchansing. On behalf of the entire team, have a good night.